Something eerie is happening in the Donetsk region. Russian soldiers are being sent in to fight in what is supposed to be a glorious spring campaign that delivers victory to Mother Russia. But something is going wrong. Soldiers are dying in record numbers as something rips through the Russian ranks like never before in history. Donetsk has become a death zone. Russia's losses are so brutal that they'll be felt for 100 years, as Putin's patsies are now too terrified to fight. You'd know none of this if you listened to Putin's narrative. According to Russia's leader, Ukraine is on the verge of collapse. Donetsk and then the Donbass are going to fall under the might of the spring offensive that Russia launched against Ukraine in March. Russia's savage war machine is going to sweep through Ukraine, and by the end of 2026, Putin will have exactly what he wants. It's inevitable. It's unstoppable. It's absolute nonsense. As Russia signals that it's ready to negotiate based on the false position of strength that Putin claims to have, the reality is that the poorly trained troops that he's sending into Ukraine are dying in droves. And nowhere is that clearer than in Donetsk. The one region that Russia wants more than anywhere else still stands, and there is about a quarter of it left to take. The offensive that is supposed to sweep through Donetsk is instead becoming the deliverer of death to Russian soldiers on a scale that we've never seen before. How big is that scale? According to the deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, Pavlo Palisa, Russia is now experiencing losses of 316 soldiers for every square kilometer, or 0.386 square miles of Donetsk that is taken. Just hearing that figure should be enough to make you wonder just how on earth Russia's military is failing so badly in Donetsk. However, it gets a lot worse for Putin when we compare the figures that we're seeing now with what we've seen in the past. A year ago, Russia was still losing far too many soldiers in its quest to take Donetsk. Only the figure then was 160 losses per square kilometer in Donetsk and 120 on average throughout Ukraine. What we're seeing here is that Russia is losing about double the number of soldiers that it was during the first quarter of 2025 in Donetsk. And these aren't just casualties. The huge increase in losses is being accompanied by a killed in action or KIA trend that spells doom for Russia's forces. We'll come back to that trend a little later, so stick with us. Before that, there's what this high rate of death combined with a slow rate of progress really means for Russia. Putin's forces may still be making slow gains in Donetsk, but those gains aren't tactical. In other words, Russia has managed to gain absolutely nothing of significance in Donetsk for the last 6 months, sacrificing so many of its soldiers to the altar of Putin's hubris. Total losses for the first quarter of 2026 amount to more than 90,000 Russian soldiers, of which over 35,000 have found their ends in the dreadful Donetsk region, that now strikes so much fear into the hearts of any of Putin's patsies who are assigned to assaults in that oblast. March in particular has been a terrible month for Russia. The Guardian reports that March was the first month that Russia recorded almost no territorial gains across the entire front line. The month saw Russia seize just 23 square kilometers, or about 8.9 square miles of Ukraine. Even January and February, which were also terrible months for Russia when it came to military losses, were better than that. Russia gained over 4 times this amount of territory in February and almost 14 times as much in January. But in March, which is the month when the spring offensive was launched, Russia has fought itself into a quagmire of a standstill, as Ukraine is tearing through Putin's forces like never before. Yet still, Putin demands Donbass. On March 31st, Ukraine's president Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that Russia had delivered a deadline to Ukraine. Withdraw from the Donbass within the next 2 months, or Russia will take it by force. But how can that threat be taken seriously now that we see the numbers that are coming out of the region? Putin is still trying to play peace negotiations as though he has all of the cards, when the reality on the ground is that Russia is bleeding out with record levels of death for territory gains in Donetsk. Take the Donbass by force, Putin. It seems that the longer the fight in that region goes on, the more Russian soldiers are going to die. The maths says it all. Right now, Russia has about 7,000 square kilometers of Donetsk left to capture. That territory includes the fortress belt of cities, which you'll soon learn are key to the losses that Russia is experiencing right now. If Russia stays at the same 316 casualties per square kilometer rate that it has right now, all that awaits Putin's forces is death on a scale yet to be seen in the war. Russia would have to burn through 2.212 million of its soldiers just to take Donetsk, and there would still be the rest of Ukraine to go afterward. For some context, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says that Russia has lost a little over 1.3 million soldiers during just over 4 years of fighting against Ukraine. The Donetsk casualty rate is so high that Russia has to edge far too close to doubling its total number of losses in exchange for a relatively small portion of Ukraine. And yet Russia is still trying to negotiate as though it's winning in Donetsk. But as Palisa points out, anybody who pays attention to Russia's negotiating tactics will know that what we're seeing here is par for Putin's course. After failing to take Donetsk by force, Russia is now falling back on false claims of superiority. Russia always resorts to using negotiating tactics like attempting to enforce deadlines when it knows that things aren't going well for it on the battlefield. So you can draw your own conclusions about what kind of success they have in the Donetsk direction and at what cost. Their advance is minimal. Tactical successes in several areas are very symbolic. There are no operational ones at all, so they are actually detached from reality, Palisa declares. Conclusions can indeed be drawn. None of them are good for Russia or the sustainability of Putin's so-called special military operation. Russia can't even get its story straight in Luhansk, which, along with Donetsk, is one of the two key regions that need to fall for Russia to claim the Donbass. Toward the end of March, Russia claimed that it had taken all of Luhansk for the third time. It's almost like the Kremlin believes that repeating itself will make the claims seem more believable. Now the situation in Luhansk is far from good. Russia controls 99.84% of the oblast. However, the settlements of Novoyehorivka and Nadia still stand, Ukraine says. And that means that Russia can't even claim to have taken a chunk of territory that it really should have occupied years ago. Again, it's desperation. False claims being made to prop up a narrative of dominance that is dispelled as soon as you look at the sheer rate of Russian losses for the meager gains that it's making in the Donbass. All of these problems are major enough for the Kremlin to take notice. But behind all of this lurks an even bigger issue that makes what is happening to Russia in Donetsk even worse. This issue alone changes everything. And by the way, if this is the kind of insight that you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We break it down like this every single day. Now, the issue behind all of Russia's Donetsk problems, what is it? Military analyst Andrew Perpetua revealed all in an April 8th X post. He points out that it's not just its massive casualty rate combined with its almost non-existent territorial gains that Russia has to worry about in Donetsk. Right now, the number of Russian soldiers who are KIA is higher than it's ever been. After analyzing around 300 videos per day from more than 2,000 sources across social media, Perpetua has found that March 2026 saw Russia absorb the fourth highest KIA per day rate that we've seen so far in the Ukraine war. But hold on a second, we just told you that the rate is higher than it's ever been. And it is, over a 4-month period. The 3 months that are ahead of March 2026 are December 2025, January 2026, and February 2026. 4 consecutive months of KIA rates that are higher than they should be. March specifically has seen an enormous increase in the number of Russian soldiers who are KIA compared to figures from the previous year. In March 2025, 4,113 of Russia's soldiers were KIA. In March 2026, that number has increased to 5,771, which is a 40% bump that has wiped out the traditional seasonal decline we normally see in KIA figures as the Ukraine war enters spring. General Winter and Ukraine did a real number on Russia between December and February. But as General Winter withdraws from the battlefield, Ukraine is picking up the slack and killing more Russian soldiers than it has in any spring period up to this point. Russia's desperation is becoming apparent. With the loss of Starlink, Putin's forces were thrown into disarray. Putin then made everything worse by taking Telegram away from Russian soldiers. Add the dysfunction of the Russian military itself into the mix, where commanders demand bribes from soldiers to keep them away from the front lines, and instructions on how to commit suicide are handed out to poorly trained troops who would be captured otherwise, and you get a picture of what the situation in Donetsk really looks like. And it gets worse. Sticking with the 4-month theme, TVP World reports that March was also the 4th straight month where Russia's volunteer recruitment was outpaced by the number of casualties it experienced. After that particular ceiling was broken by Ukraine in December 2025, the period between January and March 2026 saw Russia lose 85,000 soldiers, while it recruited only 80,456. Consider those numbers in the context of Russia's KIA rate, and you see an even bigger problem emerge. More Russian soldiers are dying on the front lines than ever before. These are soldiers who will never go to a hospital, never recover, and never be sent back onto the front. They're gone, eliminated permanently at a time when Russia is struggling to recruit enough soldiers to sustain the spring offensive in Donetsk. What this means is that Russia is increasingly unable to cycle soldiers that it has already recruited back into Ukraine after they recover from their wounds. It can't happen. Too many of these soldiers are dying instead of getting injured. And again, all of this is in service of such tiny territorial gains that they may as well not be happening. 316 casualties for every square kilometer taken is a bad enough figure on its own. When that occupied territory offers no operational advantages to Russia, and more of its soldiers are KIA than ever before, you get a crisis that has transformed into a catastrophe. With all of that, we come back to Donetsk, the epicenter of everything that Putin wants to achieve. both in the spring offensive and in Ukraine in general, is also the reason why Russia is experiencing such enormous losses right now. Something is ripping through Russia's soldiers like never before in Donetsk, and that something can be summed up in 2 words: fortress built. What Putin so often conveniently forgets to mention when he claims that Russia's forces are going to tear through Donetsk is that those forces face fortifications unlike anything else they've seen in over 4 years of fighting to claim the region. That belt contains 4 major cities, each of which has been fortified enormously due in part to the time afforded Ukraine by Russia's slow crawl through Donetsk. Slovyansk, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka all lie in Russia's way, and together they form a protective arc that blocks Russia from getting to the Donetsk administrative line that would allow Putin to claim victory in the region. Of the 4, Russia has only managed to approach Konstantinivka, and it has yet to enter that city. The other 3 cities in the fortress belt are well within range of Russia's drones and artillery, but Putin's forces are nowhere near the positions they need to be in if they're going to launch effective assaults against them. Even in Konstantinivka, Russia's infiltration groups are being torn up by Ukraine's defenses. United 24 media notes that the first assaults of the Russian spring offensive showcased how difficult it's going to be for Russia to take these 4 cities, as Putin lost over 5,000 of his soldiers and huge amounts of armor and equipment in just a few days. That trend hasn't abated. Russia's military is throwing itself at the fortress belt, and it's being batted back every single time. Now think about this. Throughout its war with Russia, Ukraine has demonstrated an immense ability to hold on to its most strategically important settlements for long periods of time. In Donetsk, the small settlement of Chaziv Yar still stands after more than 23 months of Russian assaults. The city of Pokrovsk held out for a similar amount of time, to the point where the Center for European Policy Analysis called Pokrovsk the city where Putin shattered his teeth. In Kharkiv, Ukraine has not only defended the city of Kupiansk from Russia's offensives, but it has retaken practically all of that settlement, eliminating thousands of Russian soldiers in the process. It's taken Russia multiple years and many failures to make the progress it's made in these cities and settlements, all because Ukraine has mounted steadfast defenses. Then there's the fortress belt. 4 cities that are larger than those we just mentioned, all of which are waiting to rip through Putin's forces like never before. Russian troops have spent years in a massive frying pan, and they're now being told to leap into a fire so hot that it burns them up in a heartbeat. That's what the fortress belt really is for Russia. A death-dealing machine that is already playing a huge role in Russia's higher casualty rates, slow progress, and its KIA rate. And Russia has barely even touched the fortress belt. As bad as things are for Putin right now, they're only going to get a whole lot worse in Donetsk. Ukraine, of course, has planned all of this. Disruption among Russia's forces is one of the many reasons why the fortress belt is proving so effective. And that disruption isn't just about Starlink and Telegram shutdowns. In the months leading up to March, Ukraine launched a massive counteroffensive that has allowed it to advance in the directions of Oleksandrivka and Huliapola. These regions are important because they can be used by Ukraine to safeguard the city of Zaporizhia, which is another of Putin's 2026 targets. However, the impact that Ukraine's advances have had on Russia in Donetsk can't be ignored. Putin needs to retake the territory that Russia has lost over the last few months. For that, he needs manpower, and that manpower isn't coming from a recruitment pipeline that is failing to replace the soldiers that Russia is losing. So Putin is having to pull soldiers from the Donetsk offensive toward the direction of Ukraine's counteroffensive. That adds to the Donetsk attacks being weaker than they should be, especially as we know that Russia is sending some of its most elite operatives to Oleksandrivka and Huliapola. Russia's best and brightest aren't fighting in Donetsk, they're dying elsewhere, while the cannon fodder that remains in Donetsk is being destroyed. Then you add drones into the mix. Ukraine's growing kill zones, which include the FPV drone-laden zones outside of the territory that it's defending in the Russian near rear, which Ukraine can now hit with medium-range drones, are a huge part of Ukraine's Donetsk defense. Drones are responsible for more deaths among Russian forces than any other type of weapon. By January, Politico was reporting that drones are responsible for 3 out of every 4 casualties on the Ukraine war's front lines. For context, that would mean that 237 of the 316 soldiers that Russia is losing for every square kilometer it gains in Donetsk are being taken out by drones. Also, as of January, about 80% of all the battlefield hits that Ukraine completes are carried out by drones. Metal monstrosities which are now in the air, on the ground, and at sea are wrecking Russia's forces. Drones patrol the fortress belt non-stop. Ever-present eyes in the skies are watching Russia's forces as they attempt to infiltrate and advance, As soon as soldiers or equipment are spotted, FPV drones swoop in, and all of this happens as medium-range drones cause chaos in the Russian rear by striking command posts, drone operator centers, and ammunition dumps. Russia can't catch a break in Donetsk. And what we're now seeing is the shattering of the myth that Putin has been trying to perpetuate ever since he launched his invasion. That myth has existed since before the invasion began. Russia was supposed to be a mighty country that could topple Ukraine in days. That myth was exposed for what it was very quickly, and everyone that followed has also crumbled under Ukraine's defense. The latest myth is that Donetsk is on the verge of falling, so much so that Russia is confident enough to demand that Ukraine withdraw its forces from the Donbass by the end of May. Everything we've covered in this video highlights why that myth has been exposed. Russia's victory in Donetsk is far from inevitable. Putin is losing more soldiers than ever before, and he's making those losses for scant amounts of territory. The specter of mobilization is also looming over Russia. Putin doesn't want to mobilize. He knows the level of backlash mobilization will create domestically, as Russia's people will question why such a supposedly easy win has taken over 4 years and now requires reserves who don't want to fight to be called up. Palisa himself says that Russia has been covertly mobilizing for some time. But for a conventional mobilization, Russia lacks the one thing that would make the idea fly. The most important thing, in my view, is an idea that must unite society and justify the need for such actions, Palisa notes. That idea doesn't exist in Russia. There is no unity. Just a population that is losing more than it ever thought it would in service of a madman's desire to secure his legacy before he dies. Donetsk is now a huge thorn in Putin's side. And if he doesn't make any changes, his failure to capture that region will be his legacy long after Putin is dead and Russia is trying to deal with the aftermath of a war that has already taken away so much. The spring offensive may end up being the death knell for Russia rather than Ukraine. You've just seen some of the reasons why. However, the maths behind the first month of that offensive is even more revealing. Losses accelerate as territorial gains collapse, and the war is entering a dangerous new phase as a turning point approaches. Find out more by checking out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show to see more analysis of the most shocking statistics to come out of Ukraine. And thank you, as always, for watching.